Star Citizen gets a lot of flack for being in development for so long, and they certainly have had their issues in the past. The ultimate dream for Star Citizen was a gigantic, persistent universe where you can play any way you like, visit any land, interact with everything in a meaningful way, and eventually settle new lands and be able to do this alongside other real human players, all without any loading screens or invisible walls keeping you within a small set of boundaries. Players often become disillusioned and walk away from the game, and some have gotten used to the promises and deadlines being broken and just try to enjoy it how it is. But is it time to allow ourselves to start getting excited again? Having experience in game development myself, I'm going to show you why I believe we're on the verge of a golden age in Star Citizen's development. To understand why Star Citizen is still in alpha, we first need to look at what is supposed to set Star Citizen apart from other space sim games. Most space games fall into one of two models or categories. One is on rails, where everything you experience has been pre-planned and directed. For example, you want to go to a planet, so you select the planet, loading animation plays, and then a cinematic of your ship landing at the designated location plays out as you're loaded into that planet instance. There's often invisible walls stopping true exploration, and the way you enjoy the game has been workshopped and decided by someone else. Or they're procedurally generated, where these games have less pre-planned stories out, and the exploration has been heightened by having just sort of endlessly generated variables like planets and animals and creatures to sort of technically simulate the fact that there's endless discovery. But there's something a little bit robotic about that, and after a while you can just kind of feel the repetition in everything, and it doesn't really feel like anything you've discovered has any real meaning. And they often have some limited gameplay mechanics or very simplistic gameplay loops, making like the multiplayer starts falling apart very quickly as soon as you really start trying to engage with it. There's a lot less of a persistent universe and more just a jumbled set of random options colliding with each other. Now, when people complain why Star Citizen isn't out already, you have to understand that they could have created a game that was like those previous game types I described. You could have your backer ships completed, you could have a nice set of planets and missions, and you could set out on, and it would be stable and optimized, and I'm sure it would be a lot of fun, but that wouldn't be what was promised. It wouldn't have expanded the scope of the genre and allow you to play the game however you liked. Whatever you encountered would have been from a set script of likely outcomes, and this limitation is where Star Citizen learned some hard lessons about its development in the early days. Many of the ships and assets and the way that the production was undertaken initially was all headed to be made to be put directly in the game, but each time you make something for a game, you build it to function with the core tech of the game you're building it for. So when it comes time to implement it, you just load it in and bam, it works. The problem with the core tech systems they needed to build things for was they didn't have them in the game yet. In fact, they didn't exist for any game yet. So essentially every time you'd run into a new issue, or I need to update a new piece of technology, they needed to implement it, then development, then they'd have to rebuild that entire thing all over again to make it compatible. And then with that new technology was implemented in the game and actually put in the system, everything else would usually need to be redesigned, and new things would break in new ways as they start interacting with each other, which causes more and more problems of delay as you slowly figure out how the pipeline is going to work, so you can start accurately describing things and building things and so they all fit in systems without breaking each other. To my understanding, this is where Star Citizen got its bad reputation from. They were promising game modes and features at certain dates that were historically wrong so many times that being a crowdfunded game, you've got to deliver news on its production, and you've got to make it exciting and worth it for people to still be able to keep your doors open. But they had no way of understanding the issues and delays that could potentially come up, since they were all new as they were happening. And that's a difficult thing for a developer to work with. Eventually, you would start to get a bit of a complex about announcing things, and as we can see with Star Citizen's design, I believe what's the catchphrase is change is the only constant. Well, that's pretty much a shorthand nod at this very fact that things are constantly changing. And it's why ships are taking so long, because they're waiting for certain technologies to come online. This sort of leads to why I believe we're in a spot now that we've never been in with the development of Star Citizen, and we should really start getting excited about what's going to be happening over the next couple of years, because I think it's all about to change for the best. There's two core pieces of technology right now, and if you've been following a lot of the updates, you would have heard them before. And a lot of you already understand how important it is, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard it and they kind of get it, but they don't fully understand how important this is for the development of all sorts of things in the game. There's two core pieces of technology, pretty much the main pillars of the gameplay that we've all been waiting for, and they should remove all those previous hurdles, well, most of them, which not only should see gameplay development speed up exponentially, but also see the ship roadmap start to pump out its new ships. I'm going to try and explain them in very simple terms, which should allow you to get an idea of when and how you can start expecting certain things to pop up in the game. Now, for those that have been paying attention to the 3.18 update that's coming soon, you would have heard PES, or persistent entity streaming. Now, this is something that's essentially making sure that if you put an item down in game, it can stay there for a real long amount of time. Technically, it could stay there forever. You could log out and come back and that item is still on that planet. Like, you know, say you go to a field and you chuck a pizza slice down, and then you log off and go to bed and come back and that pizza slice, that's still out there in that field. Now, that sounds interesting, but when you think about it in the context of every other game that's out there, like the ones I mentioned previously, there's something that usually happens in those games where if you chuck an item down, you can expect it to despawn very, very quickly. And that's how a server or a game kind of like saves its memory, by randomly doing these sweeps, cleaning things up and making sure that after a while, any effect that's happened on an area is reset to zero. So it doesn't hold any excess data that isn't needed to be kept there. And persistent entity streaming is one of these main core things which has stopped the development of Star Citizen for so long. And for instance, we're getting the cargo physicalization coming online, which is, the ability to, when we crash a ship or whatever, that cargo is still going to persist. The ship's hull is still going to persist and be floating there, which makes piracy actually a viable gameplay. Like, if you're a pirate and you're playing this game and something blows up, if you can't get anything from it or it starts despawning, you're technically, yes, you're partaking in piracy, but it's not really viable. Or if you've crashed and you respawn and you want to go back and fight for your stuff, if you can't expect it to still be there, then what's the point? That gameplay isn't really there. And this is the technology that gets us there. Not only is it stuff like that, but the salvage that's also coming online. If these ships like that we're crashing, or that I'm crashing constantly in Star Citizen, they're despawning or blowing up immediately. But what if we all of a sudden there's wrecks everywhere, because it just becomes a part of the landscape. It becomes something to navigate. It becomes something new that is dynamic with the way that people play it. And going out and finding them and pulling them apart to sell becomes a gameplay loop that is much more natural and born by the effects of every other citizen in the verse. But it's not only cargo, salvage, and piracy. There's also the modularity technology, which is, if you affect something in your ship and change it, you want it to stay, you want it to persist. If PES technology is being built into ships, then you will need to design these ships and modules with that all in consideration. So without it tested, done, ready to go, and then to have faith in the PES system, they can't build that into the modularity system. to like working suit lockers and gun racks in ships. Like, if you really are supposed to be living on these ships and going out and exploring in the verse, you can't risk stowing the ship and all your items disappearing or it not being able to load. That stowing and unstowing mechanic is so important. If you've got a capital ship and you've got 15 to 20 crewmates on there and they've all got their bunk rooms and they've all got their inventory and they're all running around and you got all these vehicles and everything inside of that ship. If anything happens to that entity, if you start losing items or you have to re-pull that out again and, you know, you got to charge them a fee for, you know, claiming the ship and got to get all these people to coordinate and get back on. That's too much to ask the player, and that's not them realizing the game's mechanics. And now previous games, like the ones I mentioned earlier, just would have done a simple, like, you select from a list, like a mission. You'd say, all right, let's go to the capital ship mission, and it would have pulled out a stock ship, stock inventory, stock vehicles already on, ready to go. Everyone would spawn at exactly where they need to go on the ship. But that's not what Star Citizen is about. Star Citizen is about cooperation with people one-on-one that you do. It's not like a marker being pointed out automatically. The game isn't saying, all right, you're going to go on this ship together and you're going to have this very set experience. The experience is what you make of it. And so to have that sort of natural gameplay that happens organically, you need to have these core systems in place. Otherwise, it's completely time ruining. I know I like to fly around in my Carrack a lot, and keeping items there, sometimes if I just have too much stuff in its inventory or lying around, if I load into the game and I'm asleep in my bunk, it just won't load the game and then it stows the vehicle. It's that technology isn't there yet. So every time there's something to do with, you know, modularity, piracy, salvage, or whatever that hasn't been included and they're not saying anything about it, it's usually because they're so afraid of repeating themselves constantly, saying that they can't do it yet because of, you know, this and this. So if there's a function or gameplay mechanic in the game that you're wondering, why isn't this here yet? They could have done this could be so easy. Think about, does it have something to do with items, inventory, like quick swapping items over? We all know, like, dragging items into your inventory has been such a pain in the ass, but that's all tied to PES as well. Like, there's things that need to solve when that comes online to do with the inventory. So if they spend time doing it now and fixing it for the game now, knowing that PES is going to come online, they're going to do it again, they could be working on something else in the game or working on bringing PES online in that meantime. And the other main technology is server meshing. We've all gone into bunker missions before and seen the AI run around like mad and been like, why don't they fix the AI? The AI is so stupid. The AI actually isn't stupid at all. It's a matter of CPU. It's a matter of how much intelligence the server has to be running all these instances at the same time of these AI. You see, server meshing in a nutshell, if you jump on a server right now of Star Citizen, you're pretty much logging into one computer. And that one computer is running all of the planets in Stanton. It's running all the bunkers at the same time. It's essentially this one brain that's telling each AI, you're supposed to be here, you're supposed to be here, there's an enemy here, there's an enemy here, quick, look at him over here and fire him over here. Normally in previous types of games, what they would have done is you would be loaded into essentially a different pocket. You'd be loaded into an instance that only ran client side on your computer, and all the AI and everything that you were fighting against would only exist on your computer. That's not how Star Citizen works. That's not part of the dream. They want it all to be persistent. They want any player who's in that area and that instance at the time, they want each of the AI to be looking at them at real time, you looking at that AI, you'll be able to shoot them all to react at the same time. So the AI for Star Citizen is actually quite intelligent. They're very good at shooting you, believe it or not. But the problem is that it's such a slow tick rate for the AI that you can pretty much just run around, and by the time they've got your coordinate data, you're already off, so they can't hit you. I've actually played on a server where it was just me and one other person before when there was a launcher error, but I had been in there before the launcher had broke. So for 6 hours, I played on a Star Citizen server by myself, where essentially it was a version of server meshing. I had all the computer power running towards what I was doing at any one given time. And I did bunker missions and I did not survive a single one. I'm usually flawless when I'm taking those things out, but I'd go in there and they were like the Terminator. They were taking me out immediately. Because what server meshing is instead of one computer running the entire universe, they've got one computer per planet or clusters of planets. And each time that you would move from one planet to another planet, you'd be going to a different server. And that technology of a loadless game where you're flying from one part of a galaxy to another galaxy, but technologically on the back end, you're flying out of one computer seamlessly into another computer, that's not been done before. But it's something that they're actually saying is going to be coming early next year, that they've cracked the code for it. And this is also the reason why they've changed it so you can only unstow, 3 ships at a time, because they're trying to lower that load on the server performance. Like, we went up to 100-player servers recently, but it's going to be going up by far more once we have server meshing in, because each computer or each planet is going to be able to hold far more data from all these people. And if a computer or server isn't being overloaded at any given time, we're going to see a lot less 30K crashes, and they're going to be able to add a lot more technology in there. That's why we haven't seen any new systems. That's why Pyro isn't online, because they can't just have one computer running an entire universe with all this AI and then just chuck a second one in there at the same time. That's just 100% not going to work. And they know that's not going to work. You see, these two technologies, persistent entity streaming and server meshing, when we get to the things that these both allow, this is when it gets really, really interesting. Both of these things, once they've come online, that's when we're going to start seeing capital ships. We're going to see ships that can be held in the memory well enough to be able to run and fight and function with all these people running around them with items loaded and sitting on tables and, stowed away. That needs a huge amount of memory to have that running and running well. They started adding a bunch of these massive ships into the game right now that had all these different things happening at the same time, and they were all sharing one computer. That would be awful. And if they had all these items floating around, which were eating up an extra amount of RAM, that say each time another ship flew anywhere near it, the whole thing would jutter and freeze as it's like slowly loading all that information into your client, and it just wouldn't be a smooth experience whatsoever. We're also going to see player hubs, like loading onto a planet and placing, a beacon down and building your own outpost and settlement. That requires persistent entity streaming. You've got to be able to put all your things in your base, and it's got to be able to stay there well. And keeping that amount of data of like what is in your base, all that needs server meshing. It needs all that extra CPU. The ship reworks, like all that stuff. If they're going to go into these ships and start redesigning them and gutting things out, they're not going to do that until they know how the system is going to work with accommodating for it, because there's likely going to have to be a whole bunch of changes that are going to happen to many ships once these things come online. And of course, there's like wipeless updates. Once we've got server meshing online and the items are sort of locked and loaded and they know how that system's going to work, those are the things that usually get wiped whenever like an update happens. So it brings us one step closer to wipeless updates happening. Like, those are these huge, massive things that you see people complaining about all the time. Why isn't this here? Why haven't you doing this? Why aren't you working on this? This doesn't work. All that like nagging and complaining is all because they know that if it is going to involve PES or server meshing, then they just shouldn't touch it. And that's why Squadron 42, there's been a lot of development that was happening separately with that as well. And they would be like, well, we've changed this here, and so you need to rechange that to line up with this and that. So that's why during this time, without having that stuff online, they've made Squadron 42 a whole separate thing that's working really hard, going 100% right now to get all that stuff as developed as possible, so that the technology that comes out of there, when this stuff's ready for the PU, they can integrate them and have them sort of working seamlessly. And the way that they've been ramping up, CIG has been ramping up their production houses. Like, they've been hiring people like mad and setting all these things up in these like satellite groups everywhere, all in preparation for PES and server meshing, because they 100% know that when these things come online, it is the core technology to actually bring the dream of Star Citizen online. These are it. These are the two things. These are the things that were stopping all those previous updates from happening. This is the thing that's got them terrified from building capital ships and trying to put them in game and delivering them. Because if they give them to it and just completely breaks, they're stuffed. And to be honest, I think this is why they thought that the RSI Galaxy was such a great idea, because they were realizing that they're getting so much closer to modularity being an actual possibility, that it's them sort of like nodding and getting excited to what they can do with it when it comes online. So PES is coming mid-December, maybe within the week or 2 weeks, we're even going to start seeing the first iteration from it. And I believe it's like early next year, we're going to be seeing server meshing pop up. So I just wanted to know, I know a lot of people out there are going to be clicking on this, seething that someone's telling them that they can have faith in CIG again. But look, it's an exciting time for Star Citizen. It really is. Like, the game is at a point where a lot of new people are coming to it. They're getting excited. They're buying into the dream of it and enjoying the game of what's there. And CIGs have been working hard to like develop that stuff to make it as rewarding as possible, so that when the rubber hits the road, they can really start firing content out. I believe that we are on the verge of seeing hugely significant updates once all this starts going online. We're going to see them very fast and very hard. So I reckon next year we're going to start hearing a lot more solid deadlines to do with capital ships and old concept ships. And I know a lot of people are going to be angry about me saying this, but there is reason to have hope for probably the first time in a long time with Star Citizen. And look, I hope that you have the ability to hope for that as well, or can at least see how great things can be once this sort of core technology gets in, because I'm excited for it, and I hope you are too. All right, well, my name's Dead Leader, and I'll see you out in the verse.
デッドリーダー